Dobro jutro, pa hvala za uvod. I will continue in English so that everyone understands, including the future architecture participants who are here listening to 5 hours of Slovenian conference on water. So I feel like, maybe I'll give you 10 minutes where you can also hear or understand what I'm saying. Living with Water is a project that started really in the spring of 2017 when Mateusz Celik called us all together, a group of landscape architects, designers, urban planners, publicists, and it was an open call. We all applied, and he chose these participants from the open call. As you see, there was a big group of us, and we all came from really different angles and different perspectives. So I will introduce sort of several aspects of the project really briefly, and then the project that that I was most involved in a little bit more in detail. The one thing that we all could agree on is that we should create something with water in the pavilion itself. So a fountain in itself, so to say. But one group, so Nina and Mateusz Granda, I think Nina is here leading one of the discussions later. They were focusing on the publication. So actually, I think I saw some of you have gotten the catalog today of the Pavilion, and it has a lot of essays and pictures and other projects that deal with the issue of water. And I think a lot of the research that has gone into the catalog has in some way catalyzed in the exhibition that you see upstairs. Especially also the research about the kind of current projects in Ljubljana that deal with water. And then a group around Maj Plemenitaš and Anna Abram. They had multiple collaborators, but they were kind of like the core, let's say, representatives. They created a project that, and I'm going to read this as a sort of quote from Maj. It was a multi-objective simulation and automated in situ process. It was about 3 material pieces that dealt with robotic production. And he also created a multi-scale flow map, where the main idea was to establish a relationship between anthropocentric driven processes and natural phenomena. The multi-scale flow map deals with water as an ever-changing system and a medium that can constantly change its character. So that was, their contribution with a really large, beautiful metal panel that was constantly changing in the daylight of the Biennale. And a group around. So everyone was involved in the decision process, and everyone was involved in the discussions, and we had many of them in this room, for whole days, 2 days, talking about the issues of water. And actually some of the things that got mentioned in the introduction, the kind of complexity and involvedness of water and everything was, on one hand, it's incredibly fascinating, but a challenge when you're trying to put together an exhibition. And as I mentioned in the beginning, the one thing we could agree on really is that we'll create something with physical water in the exhibition, and a fountain seemed like a good idea. And we chose actually Plečnik's unbuilt Cathedral of Freedom as a sort of foil, or as an environment that would represent best our ideas of how this fountain of wisdom, or this fountain will act as a point where all these different opinions and these different voices can come together in one place. And as you see, this is a rendering of the installation early on. There's the fountain in the middle, and around it are the columns that allowed people to vote on different positions in regards to water. But people have often asked us, why Plečnik? Why do you have to bring him up again? And I just wanted to quickly look back into the ways of, how Plečnik was used in Slovenian iconography, or particularly this project was actually unbuilt, and how it was reproduced many, many times, and why we thought it was actually relevant for us to use it again. So this is the project. I mean, most of you in this room are familiar with it. But internationally, now it is at MoMA, actually, in the Yugoslavian architecture exhibition, but until recently it was really not quite that known. But in Slovenia, it started actually very early on with Laibach, who used it as a cover, as a kind of provocative statement of actually an authoritarian system. But very soon it actually migrated onto currency. So it was reproduced millions of times, and it went onto stamps and became almost like a symbol of independence, which is crazy because it's really an unbuilt project that became kind of symbolic of a new nation. And now it's even the euro coin. You could say it's maybe the most reproduced unbuilt building in history, potentially, if you think about how many times it's been copied. And so for us, and there has been artistic interpretations. People have floated it down the river. maybe that was its first strong relationship to water. This is really burned out. I'm sorry, but there's actually, it might be hard to see at the bottom of the section, we found a little fountain. And it is the fountain where the delegates, after they are in the assembly room, they come together. Or that's how we thought that Plečnik envisioned it. It can only be an interpretation. They go to to that kind of cellar at the bottom of it, and then they start discussing and debating what we are going to do here in this circle. That was sort of the symbolic place of that fountain. And we thought, okay, we're representing Slovenia. We're going to take this kind of very iconic Slovenian project, and we'll reproduce a one-to-one copy of that fountain that we kind of discovered or rediscovered in that iconic section, and make it accessible to everyone, not just to the delegates, not just to the politicians, not just the people who actually would have, if that building would have been built, would have access in the assembly hall, but actually the public. And so so this is just a kind of showing how the section transformed, or how we kind of combined the section of the kind of delegates hall with the section of the fountain. And we, for us, the topic of the Biennale was free space, and for us it was extremely important that this free space would be, that it would be very open and accessible. So we created actually a flat ground instead of the kind of the stepped architecture that Plečnik had, and everyone was able to come in and kind of cast a vote. So that was really the idea. And those votes were based on actually extreme positions towards water. And I hope we have some of these debates in this room afterwards. It wasn't meant to be really necessarily positions that were representing our ideas, but so here are the 6 positions that we kind of, after long discussions, crystallized as sort of essential or important positions that we thought should be debated. So they were not necessarily our positions, they were just positions that we thought were important to talk about, or that people seemed to really feel strongly about. And roughly we divided it into 3 different chapters, and all this kind of voting for a position would then create a spatial effect in the installation. The first one was the economic axis, or the economic sort of positions, deregulation. There's people who really think that if you deregulate everything, deregulate water, deregulate all rules, then that will be the best possible economic system that will also benefit water in the end, because the free open market will regulate itself. And then there's the people who believe technology will solve everything. Technology is, in the end, we can all fly ourselves to Mars, or we can figure out technologies that will help us overcome our issues with water. If you go to Silicon Valley, there's a lot of people who really deeply will defend that point. And those 2, you see a QR code on there, they were actually leading onto a website, or it was linked to our website, and you could then pursue those questions further on there. Another one was the political axis, where we kind of wanted to establish a duality between the state intervention, so kind of like a strong hand, saying that only a big government, only like a strong authority can actually regulate water, because water is so complex that a single group or single person can never do anything. As opposed to participation, this idea that you have to include the public, you have to create projects where people are involved, where people kind of can have a voice, and only through that can you actually create change. And another extreme position was, very obvious with the environmental one, where, on one hand you have environmentalism, where you have people who think that, everything, the system needs to entirely change in order for us to continue to really survive, and who believe that, the way that we've been going about the environment now is not sustainable in the long term. This is a lot of people, but then there's also some who are, just don't believe in climate change and think that even though there's a scientific consensus, deny the idea of climate change. So in an almost provocative way, we wanted to put that position out there and say, hey, there are people who think that, what do you think? How do you defend that point? And this is just some shots of the installation. It was very fun to see how people came in, interacted with it. Obviously, it is the Biennale. People have an attention span of about 30 seconds. So we wanted to create something very simple that people can grasp very quickly. And if you go upstairs now, you see the other extreme. You see so much content, so much information, and it's really beautiful to see kind of how this almost simplistic installation then has evolved into a very rich installation upstairs. And this is just a little video showing how people could vote and how people enjoyed the installation. Thank you.